us on the phone line. Maroof, the objections that are being raised by the Congress party asking, has India changed its stand from supporting the oppressed now to supporting the oppressor now?
Well, it's more complicated than that. It is not about the oppressed and the oppressor. The relationship with Israel has been evolving over a period of time. Prime Minister Modi certainly became the first Prime Minister, as far as I know, who have visited Israel. But traditionally, Israel was boycotted by the Arab world, and important countries in the Arab world have now initiated diplomatic links with Israel. I think, as far as I know, UAE even has allowed an opening of a mission of Israel in the UAE. Saudi Arabia has started engaging with them. So these are changing geopolitical realities. Israel has had historically a long relationship with India, despite India not coming out in the open and formally engaging with Israel to the extent that the BJP-led government is doing. But there have been visits to India by Israeli presidents as long back as the time of Ezer Weizmann. Israel has been an arms supplier to India. Its arms trade with India is in excess of $1 billion, particularly in terms of drones and other anti-terrorism equipment. Military personnel from India have gone to Israel for training for at least the last 2.5 decades. And India recognized Israel in 1992 or 1991, 92. So that was long before the BJP really came into it being as a political party. So I don't think we should draw mileage from one statement or the other. Yes, this current government is more favorably disposed to the Israelis for a variety of reasons. They share a similar geopolitical outlook, as well as Mr. Netanyahu, the last Prime Minister, and Mr. Modi had a very strong personal chemistry. But relationships are built on a lot of other issues, and at this point of time, India will need to tread cautiously on the Palestinian question, because the Arab world has still not abandoned the Palestinian issue, though the Arab world has not achieved very much by boycotting Israel. So the whole world needs to revisit that situation. Unfortunately, the Palestinians are still being denied their rights.
Right.
And Israel is central to the harassment of the Palestinians.
But Maroof, what exactly drives India's foreign policy now? I mean, in the last 8 years, we've seen a tremendous kind of a feedback and a turn in the foreign policy that we have seen India enjoying. And was it a turning point when Prime Minister undertook the first ever trip by an Indian Prime Minister in July 2017?
Well, we have got to get real in geopolitics. You can't allow geopolitics to be held to ransom to emotional issues. Yes, we continue to be supportive of the Palestinian cause, but we engage with countries like America and Saudi Arabia, who are also party to the confusion in the Middle East. America blindly supports Israel, and never has there been a resolution against Israel and how they have treated the Palestinians, whereas the Saudis are the champions of the Arab world, but the Saudis have started now diplomatic relations with Israel. So the world is changing. Everyone is doing a stock taking based on what your situation is. Clearly, we need a lot of Israeli expertise in small arms, anti-terror technologies, and things like that. And there has been, engagements at all levels, which have now come out in the open. You cannot continue to be like some of the Arab countries who have decided that they can boycott Israel and get Israel to fall in line. But that policy has not paid off in more than 50 years, ever since the Arab-Israeli Accord, the Camp David Award between Prime Minister Begin and Anwar Sadat. So that has not led to much. So the world is beginning to realize that you cannot let opportunities fly. Now, I'll give you one example. When we did the Balakot strikes, it was Israeli satellite cover that allowed us to hit the targets accurately in Balakot. It was not American satellite or French or other satellites. So you can imagine the level of engagement with Israel has been very high in recent years and to our advantage.
Right. Maroof, please stay on with us. Mr. Anil Trigunayat is also with us on the phone line. Sir, good morning. Do you believe that both India and Israel in a way have benefited with this change in relationship, rather if we call it an upgrade in the relationship to a strategic level, sir?
Of course. I mean, India and Israel have had a very close relationship for a very long time, and that even at the people-to-people level, and that is what has kept it going. More importantly, I think that ever since our strategic partnership that has been signed during Prime Minister Modi's time and before, Israelis have been very keen to develop ties with India, the largest democracy. I mean, so it was a validation for them of sorts. But India's policy in the recent past, the change has been that we have de-hyphenated our policy during the Modi era. And that is one of the biggest advantages that we have. And now we are part of the I2U2, and in which Israel is one of the 4 members in the West Asian Quad, as it is called. And our relationship with Israel has been strengthening on a day-to-day basis. So this is a mutually advantageous and sustaining relationship. That's how I will put it.
Right, sir. But, sir, what exactly was the driving force before when it comes to, India's foreign relations with other countries? I mean, there is what the Congress party seems to be fielding in a way, saying that it wasn't vote bank politics. That has been contradicting by Dr. S. Jaishankar, the Minister for External Affairs. He is saying that we are more agenda-driven as far as India's increasing foreign relations with countries are concerned.
Well, as you know that, let me just tell you about Israel. I used to be the desk officer at the time when we established our full-fledged diplomatic relations in 1992, and at that time, P.V. Narasimha Rao was the leader. Of course, India has to look after its own national interest. It was more because we are dependent on energy security on the Middle Eastern countries. But over time, things have changed a great deal. Egypt signed a treaty, so did Jordan, a peace treaty with Israel, and the Arab countries have started normalizing the relations. So India cannot be a holier than thou. At the same time, now we see that India's policy of de-hyphenation has been also accepted by the Palestinians. So while the Palestinian cause remains very important, India works for the drives the two-state solution and always propagates it. It also knows that the security of Israel is equally important.
Right, sir. All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Trigunayat, for getting us a better understanding of the current situation there. We also have Tehseen Poonawalla with us on the phone line. Tehseen, good morning to you. I believe it was in the year 1950 when India had officially recognized the state of Israel. And following India's recognition of Israel, the then Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru had said that we would have recognized Israel long ago because Israel is a fact. What are the objections now being raised?
There are no objections being raised. I don't know why Jaishankar suddenly, who used to be a very good bureaucrat, now once he joined BJP, starts following the Deen Dayal Upadhyay WhatsApp University and wants to do cheap politics. It's unfathomable. Is Mr. Jaishankar saying that when he was in the Indian Foreign Services, he worked as an Indian Foreign Service officer against the interests of the country? Is that his specific allegation? India recognized Israel when Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru was Prime Minister of the country. India established complete diplomatic relations with Israel while there was an opposition government headed by the Congress. Earlier, there were certain reservations with Israel not to do with any Muslims in India, as Jaishankar is trying to make it out. And I'm going to take the bull by the horns. It was actually to do with India's energy security because we were dependent on the Middle East, and that's no longer the case. Saudis today in a relationship with Israel. We know Egypt is in a relationship. And even under Prime Minister Modi, India has never voted against Palestine. India continues to work along with Palestine. So please, I mean, to make for Jaishankar to say that, he's genuinely very fast losing respect with the kind of statements he's making. He should stick to what he does best, and that is putting India's interests forward.
No, but when it comes to foreign policies, don't you believe that when it comes to, it has changed tremendously, and the boost that has been given to India's relation with, putting itself on a global map itself, especially when it comes to India's relations with Israel, because we would want to highlight exactly what has been said by Dr. S. Jaishankar here. Tehseen, thank you very much for the moment. He goes on to say that there were previous governments where Dr. S. Jaishankar has highlighted, saying that had restrained themselves from building a better relations due to vote bank politics.
आप जानते हैं कि कुछ कारणों के लिए हमने जो है अपने इजराइल के साथ जो भी रिश्ते जो हम आगे बढ़ा सकते थे हमने नहीं बढ़ाए, हमने अपने आप को रोक लिया था। तो पहले बार इतिहास में भारत का प्रधानमंत्री जो इजराइल गए वो नरेंद्र मोदी थे। और हमें सोचना चाहिए कि क्योंकि पूरी देश जानती है कि हमें उस कोऑपरेशन में हमें बहुत फायदा है, उसके बावजूद हम लोगों ने अपने आप को रोक रखा था राजनीतिक कारण के। तो अभी एक बार आप वोट बैंक पॉलिटिक्स से आप निकल आए तो फॉरेन पॉलिसी पर भी असर पड़ता। और ये इजराइल ये उदाहरण है कि ये नेशनल इंटरेस्ट में था और हमने नेशनल इंटरेस्ट को डाउन किया और वोट बैंक पॉलिटिक्स को